Okay, and welcome back to still another hour of Coast to Coast AM. Robert Chapman is the publisher and editor of the International Forecaster, which is a compendium of information on business, finance, economics, social, and political issues worldwide. And Robert has, as you well know now, an extensive background in counterintelligence and has contacts around the world, which simply makes him a go-to guy on virtually any breaking domestic and international news topics. He's been on with me. He was on just a few months ago with Ian, and here he is, Robert Chapman. Robert, good morning to you.
Well, good morning to you, too. Very nice to be back.
You know, the Fed is trying desperately to keep these interest rates low, hoping that they can push us out of this double-digit unemployment. Is this going to work, Robert? You said years ago we were going to be headed for this mess, long before anybody else was.
Well, that's true, unfortunately. And the Fed just recently, in private meetings, said that they would like to withdraw about $105 trillion from the economy, and so they set out to do that. And what they did is they went to the banks and they said to the banks, "We got to have the money back," and there was some insurance companies as well. And so they have proceeded to raise money through equity offerings, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, and so they're bringing this money in. Well, while this is going on, the Treasury's looking at that and they're saying, we need some of that money for the Fed to come in and support the Treasury market and the agency market. The agency market is Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie, and FHA bonds, as well as continue to purchase what they call toxic waste nowadays, which is bonds which consist of mortgages that didn't go very well. And so they put their hand in of the $700 billion in TARP funds for about $150 to $200 billion. And at the same time, up pops the administration and says, wow, we need another stimulus program. It wasn't enough. And they're probably right. And so they would like a large part, if not all of the rest. And so here's the Fed stuck again, not being able to pull any money out of the economy. The result of that is going to be that there's going to be more inflation than there would be otherwise.
Jeez. Well, you know, they're talking about 2010 to be, as you've surmised, even a worse bailout as 2009. The banks are coming back with their money that they took under the TARP programs. Where'd they get the profits, Robert, all of a sudden, to pay these loans back?
Well, we don't know how much money that the banks received that they put back on deposit with the Fed. Essentially what the Fed did was lend them money at 0.5 of 1%, and they redeposited part of the money with the Fed at a higher interest rate so they could get guaranteed income. It's something they were never able to do before. This was something that was passed in the last 10 months. And part of the money they took, and they were again doing what they did before, which got them into all kinds of trouble, is they were gambling in the markets and leveraging their bets, and successfully so. And so that's where the money came for all of these grotesque profits that they've received. Not all of it, but a good part of it. And so with the money going back to the Fed, it makes it much more difficult for the banks to make earnings, and that'll start showing up in the coming year.
How about foreclosures, Robert, and also loan mods? Let's talk about that for just a moment. I've talked to so many people who have applied. They've been, given the runaround. It's almost as if these banks really don't want to modify. People send in applications, Robert, and then the banks will call them back a month later and say, well, we need this because this has expired. Or people send in stuff that the bank should have told them we need this, and they don't do it. And if the person didn't call to check on his application, they may never have been told about it. What's going on there?
The banks have no intention of taking loans back and modifying them. The only exception I've seen is just recently is Wells Fargo when they made an announcement, and good for them. But the point is, the whole thing is, as people have told you, and people that we have in the real estate industry that we're in contact with, same thing. It's a sham. And the reason why is if they write them down, these loans, and restructure them, it comes off their balance sheet.
Yes.
They're carrying them at X, and let's say it's $100,000, all of these mortgages. When in fact they adjust them all to, say, $80,000, that goes on the bad side of the ledger. They've got enough problems as it is now. What they're doing is delaying and delaying and delaying. And unfortunately, we were waiting for, at the beginning of the year, for the Financial Accounting Standards Board, known as the FASB, to make the banks and others report what they're doing in their businesses differently than they have been. Most companies are carrying two sets of books, one for the bad assets and one for the good assets.
Jeez.
Of course, this is not the thing to do, but government says that's okay. In these kind of circumstances, you can go and do that. And they're also marking assets to model rather than to market. Market is a realistic, a house was sold in a certain area and you have one there, and let's say it's empty, and the comparative sale was $150,000, so you say that's what it's worth on your books.
On your books.
Well, they haven't been doing that. They've been making up what they think it's worth. And so they might put it in at 180 or 190 or 200,000, and so their books are not what they should be. Well, the FASB was supposed to change that, and they came out the other day and said, no, we're not going to do that because banks are different than everybody else. So we have false reporting going on a massive basis.
You know, I had a friend of mine that lives in Detroit. He's been trying to sell his house for God knows how long, and the values are plummeting. And years ago, you could have gotten a pretty good penny for it. You can't do that anymore. He said 13 homes in a very nice neighborhood in a Detroit suburb up for foreclosure. 13 in an area. This is widespread all over the place. Is it going to get worse, the foreclosures, Robert?
Well, in Detroit, which has been the leader of the pack, so to speak, it'll get a little worse, but I don't think too much more, unless the economy goes deeply into depression and everybody will be affected. The areas that are going to get hit hardest are the ones that really haven't come down as much as they should have lately, and that is California, Nevada, Arizona, Maryland, Georgia, some of these states where there was massive amounts of people who were allowed to purchase homes that really shouldn't have gotten them. Wow. I see another 20% to the downside this coming year in residential, and in commercial real estate, 75% in total from the top.
That's a disaster then, isn't it?
It is. In fact,
that tells you those businesses that were renting those commercial buildings, they've gone under.
Yes, that's correct. The commercial has already come down about 35%. The problem in commercial is not so much that they're not making their payments. Most of them are, the people who have bought these large buildings. The problem is the banks don't have any money to lend them. So you've got a 5-year interest-only loan on building X. You made all your payments, there's nothing wrong, and the bank says, you've done great, but we can't lend you any money because we don't have any.
Jeez.
And the only way to fix that is the Fed to start some sort of a new TARP kind of program, which is only really temporary, and lend them the money so they can lend it out to the people who own these buildings along with the bank.
Will they lend the money out? I mean, President Obama said just a few days ago to these banks, start lending money. They're not doing it.
Well, that's because if they do it and they obviously see an economy that's not going to improve all that well, if at all. They could be made to lend by the Federal Reserve, but if they belong to the system. But I don't know that that will happen. Lending is a very important thing because it's the basis for the economy to grow. And the president's right on this count. And, you say to yourself, well, why aren't they doing it? Well, their books are so bad, they don't want to take the risk.